Good morning. Can you please take your seats? So good morning, everybody. Welcome to the second day of the Asia Clean Energy Forum, the forum itself, and the third day of what we call ACEF Week, or ADB's Clean Energy Knowledge Week. My name is Peter Dupont. I'm the co-chair of the Asia Clean Energy Forum, and I'm also senior climate advisor for USAID based in Bangkok. And I'm excited to welcome you all today. First, I'd like a show of hands. How many people are here for the first time at ACEF? Raise your hand. Wow. This is really disturbing because last year we had about the same number of people, and if 50% of you are here for the first time, that means we have to do a lot more recruiting for next year, or else maybe ADB might have to build a new wing this year. Last year it was a 5-day event. This year we cut it down to 4 days because we were sort of taking over ADB, and they wanted to sort of keep it a little tighter. So this is a fantastic plenary. It's on challenges in mainstreaming renewables into the power grid, and I think you will be interested and learn a lot from this panel. So with no further ado, I'm going to introduce the Vice President for Knowledge Management of ADB, Mr. Bambang Susantono. He is responsible for ADB's Sustainable Development and Climate Change Department, which is the group that puts on this event and is sort of a brain supporting the operations of Asian Development Bank. Prior to coming to ADB, he was the Vice Minister of Indonesia's Ministry of Transportation and Deputy Minister for Infrastructure and Regional Development. And I welcome him to provide some introductory remarks.
Thank you, Peter. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, a very good morning to all of you. It is a great pleasure for me to join you in the second plenary sessions of the 2017 Asia Clean Energy Forum. It has been customary, actually, for the forum's second plenary to focus on specific critical issues within the larger clean energy discussion that we are going to have throughout the event. Today, the topic will be challenges in mainstreaming renewables into the power grid. This follows a host of earlier discussion critical to developing Asian countries through their journey toward cleaner energy transitions. This range from achieving the NDCs, or the nationally determined contributions, to option for unlocking new forms of clean energy finance through public and private cooperations. ADB latest assessment of developing Asia infrastructure needs indicates that the power sector alone will require 14.7 trillion in investment until 2030. This amount is far higher than what can be reached at current investment rates. Many countries across the region have set their ambitions toward fulfilling energy access goals and transitions toward cleaner energy by deploying renewable power through high-level technology. ADB is supporting these targets. This is evidenced in our pipeline with its growing trend with investment of 2.1 billion in 2016, with a future target of 3 billion by 2020 for energy sector climate finance projects. This was also highlighted by our President Nakao, during his opening remark, as one of the ADB main actions toward financing and capacity building expertise to enable the demand for appropriate technologies, especially in the energy sectors. Faced with this demand for power and challenges from climate change, countries have a range of choices. They can focus on conventional thermal power or renewable energy, such as wind and solar, or a combination of the two. Conventional approaches have in the past seemed to be the least risky and the least costly. However, as costs for solar and wind power have dramatically decreased, there are now compelling arguments to deploy renewable technologies. This is critically needed if we are to adequately incorporate measures to mitigate adverse impacts from climate change in the energy sector development agenda. Recent global developments have underscored that this by outlining a comprehensive development pathway toward a socially equitable, economically balanced, low carbon and environmentally sustainable future. These include the Sustainable Development Goals, which respond to the challenges of conserving natural and human capital, and the Paris Agreement to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and limit global warming. Therefore, business as usual needs to change and challenges need to be faced. Conventional approaches, primarily using centralized fossil-based generations, are not the best choice moving forward. Changes in design and operations of electricity systems are required to address challenges such as the variable nature of generation from PV and wind, near zero operating costs, and the distributed nature of the deployment. Electricity system operators in many countries remain concerned about grid stability when deploying intermittent renewables. Additionally, innovative integrations of renewable into the grid, skillful financing, and advanced technology can be the key in accelerating transformations to sustainable power system. However, reports from the International Energy Agency and international experiences seems to indicate that at low shares, below 3% and in some cases as high as 10%, very little change to planning and operation is needed. It is under this context that mainstreaming grid integrations of renewable becomes an important debate. With this background, I request the panel to consider three broad areas for the discussions. First, what are the main drivers that determine technical needs for grid integrations? Second, what are the key disruptions that renewable will bring to the electricity systems and operators, both technically and from a business perspective? And third, how can countries follow a sensible path to mainstream renewables and to learn by doing? A key goal for this plenary is to exchange notes on our visions for such transformations. In this regard, we welcome the sharing of experience in adapting national infrastructure to the new technical and market demands of large-scale renewable energy generations and deployment. We look forward to deepening the understanding of the challenges faced by policy bodies, utilities, and technology providers. Distinguished guests, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it is now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Xiansheng, the Secretary General of the International Energy Forum. He has been IEF Secretary General since his elections in August 2016. Prior to that, he was the President of the China National Petroleum Corporation's Economics and Technology Research Institute. Dr. Xiansheng will open these discussions with a scene-setter keynote and share his perspective. Following Dr. Sun's remark, we will proceed to a panel discussions that will bring in representatives from a number of industries and multiple specializations to discuss Asia's onward journey to successfully manage an energy sector transitions. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Dr. Xiansheng. Thank you.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. First of all, I'd like to thank you, especially thank the ADB to invite me to join this meeting. And I'm the first time to join this meeting, and they are really impressive. And I feel that the ADB is very active, aggressive, and they done a lot of work for the new energy and the projects. Really appreciate that you invite me to join this meeting. My subject is about the roles and challenges of the renewable and the fossil fuel in Asia energy transition. So, as everybody knows that the Asia will be the future 10 years the major driving force of the world economy and also for the energy consumptions. And for this part, Asia countries are in the process in the energy transition from fossil fuel to renewable energy. Electricity production and energy consumption structure will continue to clean in the next 5 to 10 years. But the process is facing a lot of uncertainties. So we are going to discuss this issue. And also at the same time, I think Asia have three issues. One is each country needs to develop its economies, means the GDP. Yeah. And the second one is for the climate change. And this one, after Paris Agreement, 193 countries joined this one. And of course, recently, some of the problem with one of the bigger country withdraw from this one. But under this one, I think majority of the countries continue with this one. So this is the second, the challenge for not only for the global, also for Asia. The third one is for the energy transition. So by this one, I think under the three, the issues, challenges, and how to develop, that's the issue. So I'm going to talk about, within 12 minutes, is about one trend, 4 challenges, and 4 necessary conditions. Yeah. One trend of this energy transition for this green, low carbon, and the efficient and the sustainable, renewable, the energy trend, and it cannot be changed. After the Paris Agreement, this is the issue, I think, discussed for about over 30 years. And the 2 schools of thoughts are different comments. And of course, the majority feel that for the mankind, and we should have to make actions to protect the global. And also, for the some of the people feel that this is natural. Mankind cannot control this. Yeah, so that's the reason why some country support this one. But I personally feel that from this the Paris Agreement, and then it's a general consensus, the renewables and the low carbon emission CO2 of this the energy, this the trend cannot be changed, and have to be continued and made by effort of the mankind and people. So this is either from these 2 slides we can see that by BP and also by the UN, the global renewable energy consumption part is continuing to increase by the year 2016. And of course, the last 2 years, because of low oil prices, some of the investment a little bit reduced. But I feel that that's the short time. And this one is the conclusion from the February 15th of the Outlook Symposium in Riyadh, Saudi. And is sponsored by the IEF. And by this meeting, we invite the OPEC and IEA to give us the Outlook reports. On the basis of these 2 reports, IEF, we invite the Boston Consultant Group to have the analysis. So under this, both reports, and we have some of this analysis. And also this time, we invite the BP, Shell, ExxonMobil, Chevron, CNBC, Sinopec, Repsol, Total, Ramco, and so on. This company joined us. And this one, I personally feel that is the high level, the Outlook meeting. So these results, I will just brief you. By this, the result, we can see one of these, the challenge is a high proportion of fossil fuel in the future. By time year 2040, by about, I mentioned these international organizations or IOCs, one is the fossil fuel shares still range from 57 to 79% by time year 2040. And I just mentioned so many organizations. I put them into different levels. The highest one is 79. Lowest one is 57. So by this one, we can see that the challenge in the future, even by that time, the fossil fuel still is a majority. So this is, and 3 days ago, I had a meeting in Russia, in St. Petersburg, and we maybe through the media see that the President Putin and the answer the questions interviewed by the Kelly from the Fox, and we 4 people with the Secretary General of the ARENA, Secretary General of the OPEC, and the Secretary General of the GCF, the gas export country, and myself. We sit together. So my colleague Amin, I asked him, how do you feel this the new renewables by year 2040? And he told me about 50-50. And I personally feel that by that time, maybe a high possibility is a 50-50. So this is the outlook from the organizations. And then by this one, we can see that the gas, that's the green one, the gas will become the major part of this one. The green one. Is the further development in the future. And by whatever the high scenarios, middle scenarios, or lower scenarios, the gas will be the highest in the future. Means the gas, although is one kind of the fossil fuel, but in the future will continue to develop. It will play a more important role in the future. This is one of these. And for the renewables, by the different scenarios, is possibly from the 21% to 29% by the international organizations outlook. So I feel that these their comments. Of course, some of the other the comments much higher than this one. So this is the renewables, and also another information about the coal. This is the blue one, the bottom one. The lowest one, the outlook is about 13% by year 2040. And then the highest one is about 24%, now this one. So by this one, we can see that, and some of the comments say that this is the end of the coal. But the coal will continue to stay in the energy structure, especially Asia, like in China, like in India, and the Korea and other countries. So the coal will longer than original people expected. So that's even probably around 21-24% by these the different scenarios from the IEA and from OPEC. And for the crude, is about this the right color is about 22 to 25%. So by year 2040, the crude might be 1/4 of the primary energy structure. So this is the general outlook by this. And after all this, I personally feel that in the future, by year 2040, the energy structure might be a 1/4, 1/4, 1/4, 1/4. Means 1/4 crude, 1/4 natural gas, and 1/4 of the coal, and 1/4 of the renewables. Means the solar with the wind, hydro, nuclear, all these. So this is a high possibility. If you put them together, this is the outlook. And of course, the renewables will have a much the higher possibility, much faster development than the others. This is a high possibility. And the four challenges, and also by this we can see that for the primary Asia, the primary the energy structure, natural gas account about the global is 34% of fossil fuel energy consumption structure, and non-fossil fuel is about 16%, and the coal accounting 43%. And for the world of fossil fuel consumption, and by this the pie we can see that these the gas, crude, and the coal are still the majority from the left one. This one, you can see that. Of course, after some development, and the renewables will this. And then we can see the renewables still have a bigger challenge from the fossil fuel. And for the second one is for the uncertainties in technology and the development, because my time they are very limited, so I cannot So by this one, we can see that for development of new energy vehicles, and for electric cars, and also for the cost reduction of solar, wind power generations, and the development of energy storage. This is very important in the future. Later on, I just touch about this one. So renewable energy investment declined because of low oil prices, and the bigger challenge for this. So this is the second. And also for the price competitive of the clean energy. From these two slides, we can see that the left one the coal has the advantage for the cost, and also because the coal has a longer history and technologically speaking is more reliable, and also the resources more easier to supply. And also from the right, we can see that the cost for the solar PV and the wind are still higher than the utility generation by the coal. And the number 4 challenge, I think the wind, the solar, the dump, the load, curtail this issue, because for the production and the transmission and sales, all is a big problem. From this, right, this side, we can see that in China, this is the big problem, especially in the north part of China, in Gansu, Xinjiang, Jilin, this part. And then this is the big dump on the load, the volume, and compared with the German and the United States, a big challenge and a big gap. So this part, and I think the most important is how to have a good coordination among the production, transmission, and sales. And time-wise, I should be quick, so it's already this, sorry. And for the necessary conditions, I think in order to improve this part and to support the renewables energy, I think the one is important, the roadmap for the energy transition. Of course, the different countries have different conditions. However, this needs the joint efforts of different countries, and through the dialogue and seeking the joint agreement and consensus. The second one is government support and policy. Without the government support, it's difficult for the renewables. And on one hand, have to solve the problem with the energy poverty. On the other hand, for this, the transformation cannot affect the economic development. So the number 1, the necessary condition is a technical breakthrough, because without the technical breakthrough, the cost cannot be reduced. And so this needs the cooperation between the research institutions and industry companies. And how to reduce the cost of clean energy for the solar, for wind, is still a challenge. And number 4 is the implementation of the funds and the market operations. And after the United States withdraw from the Paris Agreement, and then I think that there is another challenge for the funding for this research and also for development. And this one originally promised to offer 100 billion US dollars per year to fund this new renewable energies. And so far, I think this has become an issue now. And of course, how to solve this issue? That is used through the carbon tax and the carbon trading, and also through the marketing message, and to solve this. And it needs all these efforts, and also find a better mechanism to make this sustainably development. This is my general speech, and I waiting for the discussion with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Sun. That was a perfect scene setter that builds off the presentations yesterday, where we heard about global tracking of trends in clean energy and about some of the trends in technologies. So, and I like the way you laid out the 4 challenges: the high share of fossil fuels, uncertainty in technology development, price of clean energy, and wind and solar curtailment. And Yongping, your job is to solve those challenges in the next hour. Can you do that? Okay. I'd like to introduce Dr. Yongping Zhai. He is a very important person at ADB. He is the head honcho of the energy. He's currently the technical advisor for the energy sector group. And what that means, he's that leads the strategy and supports operations for the energy sector. He previously was the director of the South Asia Energy Division from 2010 to 2015. And prior to that, he was the lead energy specialist in Southeast Asia. He worked in Africa for about 7 or 8 years during the 1990s with the African Development Bank, and prior to that he was in Bangkok at the Asian Institute of Technology. Dr. Zhai, you have the floor.
I would like to invite our panelists to join on stage. Thank you. So thank you for joining me for this panel discussions. I would like to run this first by inviting you to give us your thought, whether it's a formal presentation or just informal interaction with your thought, that we all fine. You can go to the stage with the podium or sit here as you like, but we can start with Jaquelin, Ms. Jaquelin Cochran, Manager of Market Policy Analysis Group, Strategic Energy Analysis Center of National Renewable Energy Laboratory, US. Jaquelin, please. First, your presentation on large-scale integration of variable renewable energy in the US and the international lessons learned. Please, Jaquelin.
Great, thank you, and thank you to USAID and ADB for inviting me here to give this talk. I want to, if you've seen me talk at some of the other sessions at ACEP this year or in past years, you know I get excited about some of the details of how we can actually operate the system, the power system with a lot of renewable energy. But today I'm going to just step back and discuss 4 trends that I would love for you to walk away with today. And first, to make sure we're all on the same page, I want to just go over just the basics of the power system operations. It's a challenge of balancing supply and demand at all time scales. Supply and demand both are variable, and the power system needs to keep these in balance at all times. The concern about adding wind and solar is that you are adding more variability to the supply side of that equation. So let me walk through this chart. This is about 6 days, and the yellow is the variability of the demand of electricity over the course of that week. The green is the variability of wind and solar generation. So you can see that the variability looks different for each of these two. Combined, when you add this variability of the wind and solar to the variability of load, what you have left to be balanced by the rest of this power system is this orange. That's what we call net load. And what we see in the net load is that those curves, the ramps, the changes are a little sharper, they go a little lower, and that's the part that we need to have what we call flexibility to be able to balance that system. So the flexibility is the ability of the power system to respond to change in demand and supply. So that's a term I'm going to use in the next slide. So the first trend I want to introduce is that many systems have the physical flexibility, but accessing this flexibility is the key challenge to RE grid integration. The flexibility comes in 2 forms: physical flexibility and what we call this institutional aspects, the market and institutional filter. The physical flexibility are the things that actually change when supply and demand change to keep balance, like the generators, the hydro, storage, the transmission system that allows that change. Those are the physical aspects. But to be able to access that physical aspects of the characteristics of the power system, the system operators or the market operators need to have operating rules, market designs, things that allow them to be able to make those changes to the physical aspects of the system. So these institutional filters are things like how are scheduling and dispatch conducted, what do we do with the RE forecasting, what are the market rules, how do we work with our neighbors. This is the harder part of grid integration. The easier part is setting up a natural gas plant and calling it a day. The harder part is saying, okay, what do we have already in this system? How can we more effectively operate it and be able to integrate that renewable energy? That tends to be the focus of most grid integration efforts. The second trend I want to relay is that market signals can help access flexibility from across the power system, from across the energy system, in fact. And we need to be thinking about market signals at long-term investment and short-term operational timescales. So in this picture, we're looking at various aspects of the energy system, the residential sector, transportation, commercial, industrial, and these can all relate to that center part of the screen, which is the bulk energy sector, so the actual transmission lines and the provision of electricity. With the long-term investment market signals, we want to make sure that the flexibility we want in the system has the incentive to be built, to be invested in, or perhaps not be retired if we need existing assets on the system to not go out of business. We also need these market signals at short-term timescales. So for example, that coal plant actually has some flexibility inherent to it. What do we need to do to pay the coal plant or to set up the market decisions or operating decisions so that when we need that flexibility, it's there? The third trend I would like to discuss is that increasingly we see power systems treat renewable energy like a conventional power plant, and we're removing priority dispatch. So the idea here is that it's okay, we've seen in the past that renewable energy is sort of treated specially. Maybe they're protected from being curtailed, meaning not using all the energy that's available. But as renewable energy scales up on the power system, we want renewable energy to be a good grid citizen. And to be a good grid citizen, that means the renewable energy will be visible, schedulable, dispatchable, curtailable, and able to provide ancillary services. All of these require that the renewable energy have the appropriate control technologies, and this is done at the stage of the grid codes or the power purchase agreements that are put on. So, and to address the financial concerns that developers have about, if I build this wind plant, will the energy be used or will it be curtailed? That we can separate from the system operation decisions and then address the financial risks separately. So right now we see a trend where the power purchase agreements will actually have language saying the system operator can curtail X number of hours a year, and then only after that will we start compensating for the lost energy revenue. And then finally, the fourth trend I would like to discuss is that planning that's focused on the characteristics needed for flexible operations renders concepts like baseload less relevant. So here are some pictures of a report that was just released today by REN 21, and this chapter is authored by my colleague Ilya Chernikovsky here at ASEF. But here on the upper left, we see the old baseload paradigm. And by this, I mean baseload doesn't have an exact definition, but we typically think of the baseload as, that part of the power system that's operating day and night. And maybe that's because it's the cheapest to operate, the fuel costs are lowest, or it's the most reliable because it doesn't have outages, or maybe once you turn it on, it's hard to turn off, like nuclear. As we get more renewable energy on the system, the renewable energy has the lowest fuel costs, and so therefore it gets dispatched at sort of that base load section of the plant. But of course, renewable energy isn't necessarily on at all the times, and so it's important to then think about, well, given the collection of sources of electricity supply that we have, how is that likely to be operated? When were we going to have wind and solar on the system? When are we going to be using hydro? And then what are the characteristics of flexibility of the remaining energy that we need in order to operate and maintain that balance of supply and demand? That doesn't mean that characteristics of base load are not useful. We'll still have that kind of electricity in terms of, something that can be available at all times. But as a planning concept, base load, it doesn't make sense in the sort of a new way of thinking about how to plan the system. So, my final slide. I just want to draw your attention to our website, sponsored by USAID. called greeningthegrid.org. We have a lot more details on this site on variable renewable energy, and I thank you very much for this.
Thank you, Jaquelin. We'll come back with some questions. Now let's move to our next speaker, Mr. Niels Ehlers, Head of Concept and System Strategy, 50 Hertz, as a Germany utility. So we are ready to have your presentation on how German regional transmission system operator manages a grid with 50% of renewable energy output. What takes to maintain such a stable grid? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Indeed, Jaquelin made a perfect setting for my presentation. I totally agree 100% with all the statements on the slides, and I would just like to use this occasion to add some experiences from Germany. Indeed, we are one of the 4 German transmission system operators, and we have the largest shares of renewables. So last year, we had, regarding the energy, a share of 47.5% of renewable energies within our grid. And that's, I must say, we are really proud of. Could I get my slides? Oh, is it?
Technical support.
So in total in Germany, I think last year we hit the 100 gigawatt mark with around 80 gigawatts of variable renewable generation and around 20 gigawatts of biomass and controllable. If we think about what are the best ways to integrate these renewables? I was pretty much impressed by the presentation of Dr. Sun regarding the wind and solar curtailment in northern China. And this is really indeed an issue we also face in Germany. And it puts me to my first point regarding the elements of a successful energy transition. It's really important to have an efficient RES support with good volume control and transparency. On the one hand, to avoid high costs by not controlling the volume. So and by second, getting lots of wind curtailment when the renewables are located at sites where you cannot evacuate them in the grid. So you need some sort of synchronization with the grid infrastructure and also with the planning of course, conventional generation assets. So in total, you get a feasible system. A second point where we also had quite a learning curve was which rights and responsibilities can you give to renewable installations? We did some mistakes by not getting the right grid connection codes to renewables. So setting the right grid connection code framework for renewables is really an important issue. But we also made the experience that you can give some responsibilities to the rest, just as Jaquelin said, making them a good grid citizen by giving the responsibility to the renewables to balance themselves. And we found out they are pretty good at forecasting and making their own forecast and selling the energy on the market and balance their system, making virtual power plant portfolios. So that was really a good experience. And in order to reduce must-run from conventional coal power plants, baseload power plants of the old times, I would say, it's also important that you are able to substitute ancillary services from thermal power plants to renewables and make the system able so that renewables can participate in, for example, a balancing market. And actually, we are even trying next year to have a black start of the system and to start conventional power plants by using wind generators. And the third point is to have the right market design to really incentivize all market participants, conventional power plants and wind turbines to participate in the market so that a thermal power plant has a financial incentive to reduce output in case renewables can provide the energy at a cheaper cost. If you Of course, as you also saw, the changing net load, renewables will increase the volatility of the net load in the grid. And there are some challenges to balance this volatility in different time frames. You have longer volatility. For example, in Germany, the sun is, of course, there lots in the summer and not much sun in the winter. There's lots of wind in the winter, not much in the summer. And if you look at the combined, there are times where you need to have some, sometimes even many days with very few renewable in feed. And you, of course, you must secure the supply during these times too. The solution we found in Germany was to implement strategic reserves, but you could also think about capacity market. But indeed, this is more a midterm issue. More interesting is how to balance the rest volatility in the time frame of day ahead, 1 day, and going down to seconds. And here we made the experience that it's really good to have especially a good day ahead market, a transparent market, to give the market incentives for renewables and thermal generators to decide who can provide the energy at least cost. Another technical detail is it's really important to go to short delivery periods, like 15 minutes, in order to do good balancing. But there are some technical details, but it's doable, and really the renewables can be good grid citizens. Of course, I'm from a transmission system operator. Indeed, another really big helpful thing is to extend the grid, and grid enforcement is helping you on all 3 timescales because it allows you to get some portfolio effects and save some storage or balancing costs. To end the presentation, I would like to give you some experiences from Germany. This is in April 2017. Below you can see the in-feed of variable renewables in Germany, ranging between 20 gigawatts and up to almost 55 gigawatts. And above you can see the load curve. And the difference between those is the net load that Jaquelin presented. And on 1 day, we even managed to have 85% of the load in Germany that was totally served by renewables. Actually, the northern country, Denmark, even managed to have 1 day without any thermal power plant online. So technically, it is possible to have a really high share of renewables and keeping the lights on. But of course, the system must be able to react to this. And if you go to the next slide, this is the net load at 50 hertz control area during April. And you know, if you look at the standard net load, you always will find some sort of base load component where you can say, okay, if I install a nuclear power plant that runs, or a coal power plant that runs 8,760 hours per year, it will not have to be curtailed. But as you see here on this curve, at least in our control area, there wouldn't be a chance for a base load power plant to run through, because there are times where we have oversupply and have no need to dispatch thermal power plants. Of course, in Germany, as I showed you, we still have around 15% of base load. But still, it's not as much as you might think with looking at today's net load curve. So regarding the future, it's really important to see what is really the need for base load and how flexible should the system be. And from my point of view, it would be really helpful to be on the safe side and look more into flexible generation units that are also financially economical feasible if they don't run full base load, but only, let's say, 5,000 hours per year or 4,000 hours per year. And as a last slide, forecasts can be pretty wrong about renewables. In 1993, there was a newspaper ad saying in any time frame it will not be possible in the German grid to include more than 4% of the load in Germany. It was actually even repeated by the Minister for Environmental Aspects at that time, someone called Angela Merkel. And if you look at reality in 2016 in whole Germany, we have now 30% of renewables, and that's should leave you in this spirit that a lot is possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Niels. Very impressive German experience, and I'm impressed with the last slide, but we'll come back to some questions, whether we'll be wrong also. You never forget for 2050. Yeah. Now, next presentation from Mr. Bartosz Wojszczyk, I'm sorry, good enough. President and CEO of Decision Point Global. He will talk about how disruptive technologies will shape the power grid in ways that may not currently envisioned.
Well, thank you very much. When Peter came to me with the topic and said, talk disruptive technology, so I decided to try and cover this in 8 minutes, which is almost mission impossible. So what I would like to do is start with the following. First of all, my role when I talk about disruptive technologies is not to convince you to them, because either you believe or not, it's going to happen one way or the other. Second of all, I'm almost tempted to say that most of our forecasts are 100% mistaken, because if you look at the technology evolution today, that every 12, 18, 24 months we're getting new generation on the technology, the reality is we really don't know what will be the future when it comes to clean tech rollout, fossil fuel. We have to only embrace it. And the reason we have to embrace it, ladies and gentlemen, because the reality is that if you, something like this, if you look at last 2 decades, Fortune 500 companies that have been in the technology space, 73% of those companies don't exist today because they didn't believe that the world will change. So they believe that whatever technology they innovated, it will remain, and incremental innovation will be the future, which is not the case. This is the 3 examples of 3 technologies that were decades back, and 3 quotes by extremely famous people. I didn't put those names on purpose not to embarrass some of the people from the past, but people didn't believe that, you know, aircrafts will be used for military. People didn't believe that you can use the telephone to transmit a long-term signal voice, and people didn't believe in a light bulb. And yet today, we are so many new generations ahead. I think the key element, ladies and gentlemen, is that, again, disruptive technology, it is happening, one way or the other. And after 25 years being in the industry, I had an opportunity 4 years ago to actually interact with Dr. Misha Kaku, who's a very famous futurist, and we had a discussion about the future of the energy. And a very interesting statement that was made during the event. Someone from the audience asked Dr. Misha Kaku, you know, what are the technologies that we see in the science fiction movies, Star Trek, Star Wars, exist today in the labs? And the reality is, he said that 90% of the technologies do exist in labs, but we simply don't know how to commercialize them. Because any disruptive technology will create the disruptive business models, which means a lot of stranded asset, a lot of changing the skill set and knowledge management that comes along the way. So the question is, how do we really roll out disruptive technology? So in our case, we do not only invest in the technologies, but we also specialize in commercializing those technologies. So there's many trends that we can talk in the context of energy, but I try to summarize the trends in 4 prevailing, extremely disruptive trends that are happening today. This is not a science fiction discussion. This is not high-level discussion. Technologies I'm going to talk about actually do exist, and they're in the process of commercialization within the next 12 to about 36 months. First of all, what is different and disruptive? I truly believe in the future we will not need a traditional power grid. We don't have enough copper and aluminum to build enough traditional wire, either for electrification or connect all the renewables to the loads we have. There is actually a company today in the US that have proved a wireless power transfer at the 15 kilowatt on the distance of 10 miles with 99% efficiency. Today we are building 1 megawatt facility with that company. It's a $40 million investment. Today we are talking to a couple countries in Africa of building 30 megawatt wireless power transfer from generation to the load. Today we are talking to one government in Southeast Asia to take 500 megawatt from dam, traditional hydropower, to the other country on the distance of about 15,000 miles. Maybe not all the projects will work out, but the key point is, ladies and gentlemen, that today we are going into wireless power transfer. And I'm not talking about charging your electric cars, which is inductive-based charging. Second element, there are companies today in the US that figure out how to do wireless power within the house, within the building. Today, the capacity we can deliver on the wireless power is about 70 watts. So one of the fundamental business models we are going to prove is the following. We want to build the largest solar farm or wind farm somewhere in the place where no one cares about regulation, policy, people around, and take that power and deliver to any single house across the world behind the meter. What that means, I don't need the regulation to tell me how to deliver the power. I can deliver this directly to the end customer. And we are today testing that specific business model with some of our partners. Second element, programmable materials. This is very much disruptive technology that comes from the textile industry. Who would think that energy space can be impacted by textile industry? Today we're working on the materials that actually I can design what we call a spray-on photovoltaic, which means you buy the paint, you paint your house, and that material captures the light, and with the 30% efficiency converts to energy. We can do the same thing with the energy storage, which means the materials itself will enable a microgrid or localized hub generation and demand supplied elements. Third element, artificial intelligence. I don't know how many of you have seen the movie I, Robot with Will Smith. And in that robot, there is a Wiki. It's artificial intelligence computer that basically tells all the robots how to support, how to function within the human community. Today, there are companies that are designing what we call a singularity of the technology that will basically enable, based on the tactile-based learning capabilities, for the grid to be self-managed, self-operational, self-scaling. And I'm not talking about the large grids, I'm talking about the microgrids, localized type performance. And again, this comes actually from the telecommunication space and aviation. So we are going very much into self-managed grid. Now, everything, and put a wrapper around it, and I know there are some presentations at this event, blockchain, Bitcoin of energy. I truly believe that the future is really for the companies that don't own the asset, but very much trade services and goods, and blockchain is a great example of doing that. Another technology that I didn't put here, we talk about generation. There's actually pretty substantial progress in the US around cold fusion. For many years, people believe cold fusion is unrealistic. There are actually pretty good substantial developments that we believe in the next, probably in a decade, we'll have a very commercially scalable cold fusion elements. And again, the reason I'm saying this, because after 25 years of industry, I've learned a very simple principle, which is basically was said by Sir Arthur Clarke, that every revolutionary idea seems to evoke 3 stages of reaction. One, it's completely impossible. How many of you remember when everyone talked about electric vehicle, it's not going to happen, and today it's like, it's going to happen one or the other. Second, it's possible, but I don't think it's worth doing. That's the second stage. And third stage is, well, I told you all along it was a good idea to do it. And unfortunately, the shorter we can get between 1 and 3, the more we'll realize that disruption is part of our life, and we have to embrace it in the best possible way. And with that, I'm still 40 seconds short, so for the next speaker. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Bartosz. Each time I'm inspired by your speech. I heard this more or less in Yokohama this second time, but I still have some questions. I'll come back to you. Next speaker, we have Mr. Somesh Kumar, who's the leader of Power and Utilities group of Ernst and Young, India. Mr. Kumar, please. You'll talk about the perspective of renewable energy and grid technology, how this technology would affect Asian utility business model. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Well, that was a good presentation. And, and so much has already been said by the panelists and also in the deep dive sessions we've had till now. So it's always a challenge to find something new to say. So I'm just thinking of what new can be said about it. But the most intriguing fact that we find is that in each country we see different models, we see different ownership patterns, we see different economic conditions. But the challenges and the issues that we are facing or we are actually witnessing with renewables coming in are pretty much common. The themes are very, very common. So we actually are one world in solving these kinds of problems. So, that brings us to a very important perspective as to, how the utilities are responding to these changes. Whatever is happening to renewables, they're disrupting the way the current models work. So how are the existing generation, transmission, distribution, retail supply utilities actually changing or adapting to the situation? So I will cover a little bit on that, and my time has already started. Okay. Well, I'll skip my first slide with just, we've already heard that renewables are becoming the center stage of power generation everywhere across the globe. So how do the existing utilities respond to this? So there are broadly 4 trends that we see. Some utilities are looking at exiting the market, which is clearly just winding up and closing down their business. And we have examples for that. Some utilities have still not woken up to the fact that they really need to change. As Bartosz just said, that whether you accept that technological changes will happen or not, they are happening. They will happen. So, some utilities have not really recognize the level or the intensity with which the change is happening, so they're still in a phase of ignoring it. Well, the more intelligent utilities, forward-looking, have started embracing these changes. So they're finding ways of reorganizing themselves, reorganizing their business streams, cutting down on their coal business and focusing more on renewables, or they're adapting to different models of supply, becoming more aggregators. So whole lot, or adapting better in terms of technology. In many countries, we have seen that even the basic level of technology is not available, especially in these developing countries. So they now have to migrate to a far more advanced level of technology, so that's all embracing change. And these utilities, when they go a little ahead in their life cycle, so after embracing change, they're also looking at fighting back certain things, taking head-on certain regulations which are not conducive to development. They're trying to make all those changes possible in the market, which actually enable them to operate more effectively in this fast disrupting market. Okay, so if we just look at some of the generation utilities and how they're responding, and I won't go into all the details, but the idea of giving some of the examples here, and these are across the globe, Europe, US, Asia, is to show that there are all kinds of utilities which are changing and the way they're changing. So the drivers for change, of course, remain the regulatory push for low carbon agenda, a decreasing cost of renewable energy, our commitment to climate change, as well as low interest rates, which are occurring across the globe. The financing cost is coming down. So what are the utilities, the generation utilities doing? We've seen that in countries, some of the more volatile plants have been mothballed, they've been stopped. Just in terms of example, Exelon plans to shut down their nuclear units. We're looking at several utilities who are restructuring and optimizing their generation portfolios. They're bringing much larger share of renewables into their conventional generation sources. The energy mix is changing. Some of the bigger oil and gas giants are also looking at diversifying into renewable energy. And, they're also looking at, since they're, expert in, offshore drilling, they're going into offshore wind. So, all kinds of models which bring convergence of their core capabilities is happening along with what can be done new in the changing markets. We are also looking at several investments, and we've talked about mini grids, microgrids. So all those models are emerging. And this is not just in a few countries. The idea is to say that it is across the globe. If you see any country, pick up anywhere, you are seeing these trends. They may be different in terms of form and nature, but these are the ones which are coming up everywhere. So these are some of the indications of the changes that are happening. If we look at, in terms of transmission and the market creation, all the challenges have been already highlighted, I think, by the panelists. We are, absorbing all the renewables into the grid is a challenge because of their variability, because of, adequate reserves not being there in the system, because of lack of adequate forecasting and scheduling mechanisms, limited ability to back down the base load plants, the lack of ability to have availability of hydropower. So, you know, there are a whole lot of issues that are there with current level of integration. So, you know, broadly, there are 4 themes that need to be taken care of while integrating, and, you know, that's, I try to spell out that way. So in terms of the conventional plants, if you have, you know, they're not going away, they're there, you know, the ones that are being set up, unless they're stopped, they're there. So what do? You know, somehow we have to make them more flexible. So that's one area of the existing power plants. In terms of energy storage, you know, you have fully dispatchable storage, which whether it is hydro, whether it is pump storage mechanisms, we need to have more of those. As well as battery storage, so you know the costs are coming down, so that we have to find a balance or a trade-off between the costs and the level at which we can deploy them. There is a far more demand-side participation, so how do we make sure that industrial loads, the heating loads, actually are able to vary their demands and you know, in a time period when greater power is available through renewables. So what can we do? What market signals can we send for that? And lastly, you know, the wind and the solar and the renewable units themselves have to have an element of controllability and curtailability. So these 4 elements will help integrate renewables better into the system. As again has been said, I think you know, there are 4 key pillars for creating the market in the new setup, which is around dealing with imbalances, the congestion in the transmission network, creating enough ancillary services in the market, as well as creating right mechanisms for scheduling and dispatch. Well, that brings me to my second last slide, which is, you know, what are the transmission utilities doing in regard to this? You know, again, if you look at the trends, they're disposing of grid assets in some countries. Wherever we are seeing low utilization of networks, you know, there is a consistent thought as to how the utilization levels of the existing transmission infrastructure can be improved. Of course, most of the utilities are making far more intensive investments into capital assets, whether it is for technological upgradation or, you know, just extending the transmission infrastructure from load centers to supply centers. And another trend that we're seeing is in many countries is, you know, there are virtual power plants which are coming up, which sort of integrate the renewable energy along with the grid. Similarly, on the retail supply, if you were to see, you know, the consumers, because of this change, is becoming far more discerning everywhere. And, you know, we're seeing that trend even where the choice to consumers were not there, especially in some of the developing countries like India. So consumers are now started demanding far more service, far more quality, a better price for their services. So the utilities now are actually converging more with the consumers, you know, whether it is in terms of two-way flow of information, whether it is rooftop solar PV that is being generated. So all the consumers are now prosumers, they're not consumers any longer. Whether it is having distributed model of storage. So, you know, the retail utilities are also trying to innovate and see new models by which they can engage with their customers much and much more. This is just a summary of all the trends that is happening. So this is my last slide, and, you know, I think I've said it all. We see in the new model of the power sector, what we're looking at is we'll see a host of generation, conventional plus renewable. As Dr. Sun said, that, you know, the conventional generation is not going to go out. It's not that the coal or nuclear will be out completely. So it will be significantly supplemented by renewables. There will be a whole lot of automation at the T&D level. You know, there will be a two-way flow of information, complete information. And there will be several types of consumption models, whether it is virtual plants, electric vehicles, distributed generation, and a far greater participation of consumers in the whole electricity value chain. So I think that was it. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Mr. Kumar, for sharing your views on new business models for Asian utilities. We'll come back to you with questions. Now, may I invite our last speaker of this session, Mr. Richard Taylor, CEO of International Hydropower Association. Richard, please.
Thanks very much for this opportunity to contribute to the conversation. I think the previous inspirational presentations have set the scene for a discussion about our energy future. I'll start with this slide. It's superseded today by the release of the Global Status Report from REN21 for the 2016, but this is the 2015 position for renewables in the electricity sector. I do have trouble with the proportions that are reported in the energy sector as a whole, but that's another debate another time, I think. But if we think about heat, power and transport, electricity is going to become increasingly central to solving the problems that we have in terms of a cleaner energy future. And I want you to focus on the renewables contribution, 23.7% of the world's electricity generation in 2015, and that market share is set to increase. I'm convinced of that. But how do we demonstrate that that growth in market share can really be achieved in delivering a secure and reliable supply, going beyond the power into the heat and transport markets in particular, and the cooling of the heat side? When it comes down to hydropower, it's delivering 1,246 gigawatts of electricity capacity in the world. That's spread across 150 countries. Approximately 1 billion consumers of electricity are receiving that from hydropower in proportion. 4,100 terawatt hours per year of generation. But that generation is not delivered in a way that is equal in terms of the level of service. Hydropower can be developed in a whole range of scales, from the very small kilowatt capacities right up to stations that are multi-gigawatts. It has the operational flexibility and efficiency. Efficiency is in excess of 95% of converting the energy to the electricity supply. It can store and be a very valuable backup for renewables, as has been mentioned, but it also has a very important role in managing fresh water. The infrastructure that we need to deal with probably the greatest challenge of this century for humanity, which is making sure that we have water in the right place at the right time, and we don't have too much of the stuff as well. That infrastructure needs to be financed, to be paid for, and hydropower has a role in that too. I might finish if this works. I might have some contingency if this doesn't forward very quickly. I want to talk about renewables working together. I think this is much, much more important than talking about technologies in isolation. Can renewables deliver 100% renewable systems? Well, the answer is yes, it can. We've seen this in island systems repeatedly and increasingly. The example to your left is Iceland, running 100% renewable electricity system, 100% renewable power heat system, and an increasingly renewable transport system. That is derived from wind, from geothermal, and from hydropower, working together in synergy, delivering heat in terms of the lowest cost, delivering electricity in terms of the lowest cost, and increasingly providing the electricity system for electric vehicle fleet in the country. The middle section, I want to really talk about a revolution that's happening very, very quickly in front of us, which is the solar revolution coupled with hydro. Photovoltaics have gone from kilowatts to gigawatts in about 24 months. It's extraordinary, the amount of deployment, the amount of synergy that exists in this particular technology of floating PV on a water surface. You already have the land issue addressed with a reservoir. You already have the infrastructure, the electricity, the human capacity to maintain and clean the two technologies working together. And this is, I think, something of great importance. The operating regime is improved by the temperature regime. The cooler water surface underneath the panels can lead to a 10% increase in efficiency from the solar panels. And of course, you have the cleaning fluid immediately adjacent. Water and wind works well together as well. From a larger scale system, Hydro Tasmania here in this region has a system of water and wind working well together with the hydro providing the firming capacity for the wind. This example here is from Germany, where there is a water backup for the quality control of the very large wind turbine generation, providing through a demonstration project a pump storage hydro combination. And here on the right-hand side, we have the storage of water with new innovations where the obvious options of pump storage and storage hydro might not be available, using seawater in the upper example, and in the case of a prototype being proposed in Germany of gravity storage, where there's a cylinder of rock and the water is pumped under a cylinder of rock. How do we do this in a way that we can attract the necessary investment? I think the main issue around hydropower, as someone said yesterday in a meeting, hydropower is controversial. We need lots of reassurance about all kinds of issues, in particularly the sustainability performance. How do we measure it? How do we make sure that we can report around it, have some kind of independence and confidence about things being done responsibly? The tools exist. They have been used and developed since 2011 all around the world, from the smallest projects to the largest ones, from all types: run-of-river, storage hydro, and pump storage. I think I'll finish there, but I just want to say that from the point of view of the panel's discussions, if we look about renewables from a systems point of view, I think we have a very bright future. We recognize that thermal power has a very strong contribution and will continue to make that. But I think the confidence in renewables, and from the point made earlier about it being impossible to probably not worth it to I told you it was a good idea, I think we're very much in that third space. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you, Richard.